As mentioned in our top story, Egypt is caught up in a row with FIFA over interference. They possibly face suspension of the Egyptian Football Association. But they're not alone. Nigeria, too, is caught in FIFA's crosshairs on a similar case of interference. Last week, the country's sports minister set up an advisory committee which will report on options the country can employ to resolve the NFF leadership crisis. Well, joining us now for more on this is Tayo Balogun, a sports analyst in Lagos. Tayo, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, we know, of course, that Nigeria is no stranger to these administrative wrangles with FIFA. But how does the country plan to resolve these frequent power struggles?
Yeah, most of us in the sports arena here in Nigeria are of the opinion that really there aren't much to say about this so-called crisis, because there's none. The fact of the case is that according to what has been put in place, there is somebody that has been elected, there is a body elected into the Nigerian Football Federation, and of course there are people who did not even take part in that election and are trying to challenge the process. But what we know and what everybody knows here in Nigeria is that the status quo will remain, and nothing is going to come out of the wranglings that are currently ongoing.
And of course, just looking specifically at the fact that FIFA is concerned about what's happening in the NFF, the question of government interference can often be very emotive. Of course, governments spend a lot of money, or at least allocate large amounts of money to football associations, and yet they have to surrender a portion of that control, administrative control, to FIFA. Is this considered fair?
I think the problem really in this particular situation comes from FIFA, because from 3 years ago, the former president of FIFA came to Africa and said it's going to be wrong for government in Africa, who has been spending 70–80% of all the money available for football, not to have any say in the affairs of football matters. And when you look at countries like Nigeria, Ghana, most of the countries in Africa, to be precise, none of them are able to stand on their own and not look at government coffers for some form of support. But it's going to be ridiculous if government is putting all this money and then we have a so-called FIFA rule that says there's not going to be any room for government to have a voice in the structure of running football. I think that is wrong. But until government, football ruling bodies in Africa and governments in Africa actually get together to get to FIFA and tell them, look, this is the situation we're in. It's not going to be the same thing you have in Europe or in the America. We are not going to have some peace in this regard.
And it seems that FIFA has taken things a little further. You look at the situation in Egypt, Nigeria, and now Guinea. FIFA has put a normalization committee in place. Do you think this points to a crisis of confidence, perhaps, in Africa's football leadership capabilities?
The structure of African leadership in football is one that is begging the issue. We really haven't had people who should be there elected into office in Africa. We have people who have had the way of manipulating, and of course they rely on this so-called non-interference from FIFA to manipulate the system to get so many things done out of contest, and this situation continues. We've had this for the past 10 years in Nigeria, and in Egypt is actually a situation where they were trying to say what went on is not according to what the courts in Egypt would accept. The same thing in Guinea, where the normalization committee has been set in place to make sure that we have what would be acceptable to FIFA. But the thing, for my mind, the thing to look at for is a situation whereby FIFA would sit down with people who know about football in Africa, people who control sports in Africa, to say, look, we know we cannot operate the rules that we operate with FIFA in Africa. So what do we do? How do we have a situation where people who know about football will get to run football in Africa, and it is not going to be... I want to tell you that in Nigeria, if everything is done properly, football is self-sustaining. We have a situation where the football authorities in Nigeria would not need to look for government, towards government for one kobo. But the situation is that things are not being run properly. The private sector is not encouraged to put money in it because there's alleged corruption, because they know that whatever we have is not going to go down to for what it is being put in place for.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Tayo Balogun, thank you very much for that analysis, joining us there from Lagos.